Hello everybody, I hope you're doing marvellously well. It is time for another Frequently Asked Questions Friday, a Fact Friday. And we're big, we're bad, we're back, and I'm dressed in black. Hello, please subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Of course, you can go to producelikeapro.com and sign up for the email list and hit the like button. It's always lovely to see that people like the videos, but most importantly, ignoring all the other stuff, please leave some comments and questions below, because this is where we look for the frequently asked questions. We look up here and we start to find correlations of questions that get asked. Okay, this first question, I just glanced down at the list because I basically do this cold. Eric, sitting behind the camera, hands me a list and I read a question and then I answer it. So I don't get a chance to sit there and formulate a plan, an evil plan of how I'm going to answer the question. This question is going to take some thinking. The question is, what are your top 10 best engineered, produced albums of, say, the last 20 years? Wow. Top 10. That's a really crazy one. I've got to think about that. I'm going to start plucking them out of the air, albums that I was impressed with. It's tough though, because I don't know if I can specifically speak to best engineered or produced. Because, why do I say that? What I mean is are we talking technically? Because to me, music is much bigger than just the technical. I mean, you hear me talk about this all the time. You need to know the equipment you use so well that you don't have to think about the technical aspects. You just want to get into the creative. You're like, I love a sound. I want to capture the sound. There's performance. Or I want to create this sound. Whatever it might be, you need to have an understanding of your equipment that is second nature, or at least isn't holding you back. Maybe it's a big ask to say, know your equipment, back to front. Not everybody knows every essence of every piece of equipment. And also, as I often say, you hear me say it, Jeff Emmerich, one of the greatest engineers that ever lived, was 19/20 years old when he made Revolver. And there's no way he knew every detail about every single piece of equipment. But what he did do is he challenged people. He challenged himself, the band challenged him, he challenged them, and they created amazing sounding, creative music. So, just know your gear well. So with that tangent, I'm going to start naming some albums off the top of my head, which I don't know if necessarily they're the best engineered, but to me, they're the best produced because they're super creative. God, I hate being on the spot, but serve me right. I think the one that jumps out to me, and I think it's early 2000s, of a rock album, the one that jumps out to me is My Chemical Romance, The Black Parade. It really does. I remember the first time I heard that album, I was like, yes, I've gone, 2 minutes without mentioning Queen? I remember hearing it and thinking, wow, this band had been listening to Queen. It had all of the things that I love. It had a big production, but it just never got crowded, but it was big and it was exciting. I really absolutely love that record. I think that record is a masterpiece of production. Okay, I have Wikipedia open here. I knew it was Rob Cavallo. So yeah, Rob Cavallo did the album and it did an amazing job. I think it looks like he shared production with My Chemical Romance. It was 2006 that it came out, so that makes it 13 years old. I work with a lot of artists that also name check this record. I think it is a masterpiece of production, and it is a wonderful sounding record. And it did a lot of things. It really got everybody excited about rock music at a time when maybe rock music was sort of seemed a little boring. And it also united whole audiences, because you had guys like me and even older that loved it from a rock perspective, but then you had a lot of kids that loved it as well. I mean, it really was, as Americans say, bases loaded, home run, a grand slam. It just seemed to hit on all fronts. A truly amazing album, amazing piece of production. But of course, it helped that the songs were fantastic as well as the amazing production. Okay, next, actually this is in no order. This can't be a top 10 in any order. Next is probably Herbie Hancock's The River, which is the Joni Letters. I think it's called Herbie Hancock, River, the Joni Letters, which is an absolute masterpiece. Herbie Hancock has been a big discussion point, because of Michael Beinhorn. Having Michael here, hanging out was absolutely wonderful, and getting to talk about, Future Shock, and of course Rocket was huge. Herbie Hancock for me is the glue that holds everything together in the world of jazz and rock. When you think of everything he did with Miles Davis, then you think of course as futuristic as Future Shock got to be. And then there he is doing an album of Joni Mitchell songs after Joni Mitchell did an album of Charlie Mingus songs back in the 70s. So that is an amazing album. I think it was about 2005. And as far as production, yeah, unbelievable. The lineup was insane. You had Vinnie Colaiuta. It was produced by Larry Klein, who is actually, I think now, Joni's ex-husband, and also played bass, I believe, on one or two songs. I mean, just a phenomenal record and a masterpiece of production, and just sounds really beautiful. I can't remember if it won the Grammy that year, but it probably did. For me, it hits the home runs because it's Herbie Hancock, who, of course, Watermelon Man. I mean, come on. We're talking funk in the 70s, 80s, like hip hop, the way he was mixing those, just amazing stuff. And then jazz, and there he is doing a Joni Mitchell album. That to me is what I want from artists. I want career artists that have several peaks and just in different genres and bringing so many things. So Herbie Hancock, River, the Joni Letters. And the year's 2007, not 2005. Oops. I just wicked it. And River was only the second jazz album to win the Grammy Award for Album of the Year. I'd forgotten that. So pretty outstanding. An absolute masterpiece. And we're moving all over genres. Okay, this is a little bit of a contentious one. Because I think people will fight about the idea of how it was engineered. But I think production-wise and the splash that this album made is pretty significant if we're just staying in the last 20 years. The Strokes is this it. Now, I'm actually not the world's biggest Strokes fan, but you're asking about production and engineering. It sounds like a New York band. The first time I heard the Strokes, I was like, this band must be from New York. This band must have listened to the Velvet Underground. This band must be Lou Reed fans. And I love the guitar playing. I love those kind of two-note kind of parts where they had like interweaving guitar stuff. I mean, to me, it was really, really a brilliant piece of production. And because it had a sound, it had a really identifiable sound. It didn't have huge hi-fi low end and huge 20K sizzle on top. It sounded very narrow and very, very, very stylized in a really, really cool way. So for production, and I suppose the engineering had a huge amount to do with it, that to me is a really, really important record. And to be honest, it brought a lot of people together because it brought indie and rock guys together and punk fans. It was a great, great album. And the album was produced by Gordon Raphael. Okay, so we've done a rock album, we've done a jazz album, we've done like an alternative indie-ish album. This one is a very, very important album by a very, very important artist. Amy Winehouse, Back to Black. I believe this was 2006. It was Salaam Remi and, of course, the very well-known Mark Ronson. This was a pretty freaking awesome record. Salaam had done the album Frank before with Amy, which was a masterpiece, and showed the beginnings of this English girl who had this sort of jazzy quality to her without sounding old-fashioned. Does that make sense? She didn't sound like she was mimicking. She literally sounded 100% believable. When Amy Winehouse sang, I believed that's who she was. Everything made perfect sense. It didn't have that sort of contrived, I'm trying to be jazzy thing that some singers do. So I believed her. And that sort of pain that she had in her voice was borne out by her very brief life and her eventual death as well. This record is unbelievably phenomenal. Those guys, Salam and Mark, managed to capture something that sounded and sounds to this day super current, but still, you know, Mark and Salam managed to pull out the classic kind of, you know, I suppose it's that sort of cocktail era of jazz in some ways. The 50s and early 60s meets kind of classic soul and R&B. I mean, just, it has class written all over it with capital frickin' letters. It is a classy sounding record. It's nothing contrived about it at all. You just believe every single note that is sung and played on that record. So hats off to those two guys for the production on the record. I did have the privilege of working with Salam Remy last year, and Salam is the real deal. Salam, we were waiting for the band to show up. It will remain nameless who the band are. But we were waiting for the band to show up, and Salam walked into the live room and just sat down at the drum kit and started playing this amazing groove. So, of course, I hit record. Just phenomenal groove. And band still hadn't showed up. He started wandering around a little bit, picked up some bass, started just playing bass like a badass. And I'm like, okay. And then he's like, are the mics on the piano? And I was like, sure. So I went in to record on the piano, and he just played some beautiful jazz piano. So really, really super talented guy. I know Mark Ronson obviously has proved his worth his weight in gold with the stuff he's done with Bruno Mars as well as Amy. I mean, just two incredibly talented producers working with an incredibly talented singer and songwriter. Back to Black, Amy Winehouse is pick number 4 for me, in no particular order. Okay, number 5. In no order, of course, but number 5. This one to me is a no-brainer. We've done like indie, we've done this, we've done that, we've done rock, we've done a Demon Days. Demon Days by the Gorillaz. Not even, it might be the best one because it hits on every frickin' level. It's the songs that come on the radio, and all my hairs are standing on. I love, you know, we always talk about blending genres. I mean, Damon Albarn, the singer of Blur, puts a band together that's a cartoon band with his friend who did Tank Girl. And they put together this band idea, and then they bring in just a bunch of badass musicians and rappers and singers and whatever, and just create an amazing band. The Gorillaz are freaking incredible. I've seen them countless amounts of time. It also helps that Matt Butcher, their front of house, is a very good and very old friend of mine, and who's also been with Blur for a couple of decades. It's one of the best shows you'll ever see because no stone is left unturned. It's like rock 1 minute, it's rap the next, it's hip hop in the middle, it's EDM, it's acoustic, it's piano driven, it's whatever. It never loses your interest, and that sums up Demon Days. The first time I heard Demon Days, I was like, what is this? And I just loved it. Every song is hooky, the production is really exciting. It hits on all levels, and I don't think it's ever going to be dated. That's one of the other things about these records, is they're all classic and classy, and they're of a time. Yes, they definitely are of a time, but they definitely stand above and beyond so many other stuff. And I'm going to miss out great records because you're asking me to name 10. So these are just the ones that spoke to me, and you can have 10 different ones. But Demon Days, masterpiece. Just an amazing lineup. I'm going to do a quick Wikipedia of it, and we'll see who is on it because I can't remember every single detail. Unlike Eric, of course, who could probably, you know. Genius. Okay, so it's 2005. It was recorded in Studio 13 in London. The producer was Gorillaz, which obviously would be Damien. Danger Mouse, Jason Cox, and James Dring were the producers. I mean, 4 singles, Feel Good Incorporated, Dare, Dirty Harry, El Mañana, and Kids with Guns. It's got a gospel choir on it. Dennis Hopper is on it. Shawn Ryder's on it. De La Soul are on it. Nina Cherry is on it. There's so many incredible musicians on it. I'm just scrolling down the incredible players that are on this. Really, really great work. So Studio 13 was actually their studio, according to this. But anyway, I'm sure you all know, but if you don't, go back and check it out. Just a diversity of sounds. It's just a phenomenal record. Great, great work. And Howie Weinberg mastered it. We're gonna really keep this diverse. Now, this is a tough one for me because I'd be foolish if I didn't put a Coldplay album in here. So is their best album their first album? Is it Parachutes? Or is it A Rush of Blood to the Head, which I think is a better sounding record, production-wise? Coldplay's a tough one. So I think it's Parachutes from the perspective of coming out and just being really fresh and really cool sounding. But sonically, I really love A Rush of Blood to the Head. So I'm going to go with Parachutes. I'm going to go with Parachutes just because it was 2000. I remember hearing Yellow incessantly on the radio in America. I just couldn't get rid of it. Hearing that guitar, that guitar sort of going in and out of tune on that riff. Just like, it's great the way it just kind of like pushes and pulls against it. It's a great record. And I think that I would argue that A Rush of Blood to the Head is a better sounding record. They probably spent more money on it, quite frankly, because they had money 2 years later to do it. But the thing about Parachutes and why I think it deserves to be included in a production realm is because it was so fresh sounding for the time. Now it becomes commonplace. So many bands have done that. But we're talking about production and engineering. And when you're talking about production and engineering, you have to remember that a sonic landscape that an album can create, something fresh and new, is production. I mean, that is a big part of it. Does it mean that 500 people have done something since? Of course. And is it the best sounding piano, electric guitar, bass and drums record? Probably not even in the top 10. But when it came out at that period, dang, it was fresh, as the kids say. No, it sounded fantastic. And the songs were phenomenal. And the production went against all of that kind of metal that was on the radio. No disrespect to metal, but it was like very Metallica in 2000. And then suddenly, you know, it was a lot of heavy bands. And then suddenly this piano, vocal, single electric guitar, bass and drums with great songs is on the radio. It was a nice, refreshing change. So yeah, we'll have to go with Parachutes. Okay, so if we're going to be really honest and cover the whole spectrum of every genre, I would be really, really remiss if I didn't mention this album. Jay-Z's The Black Album. I think I have to say that record. We're talking top 10 production and engineering of the last 20 years. That album is a masterpiece. And whether you're a rap or a hip hop fan or whatever, you would be really foolish not to mention that. I mean, it's a tough one. The Marshall Mathers album by Eminem probably should be in the top 10 as well. But if I have to pick one of the two, I'm going to go with Jay-Z's The Black Album. I think it is a masterpiece, and the fact that he brought in so many different producers. I think every song he worked with a different producer on every track. I'd have to go back and look at Wikipedia to find all the details. But every song told its own story. Every song was a masterpiece and of production. And we're talking about production and engineering. So Jay-Z's The Black Album, which I think was 2003. And I think Marshall Mathers, Eminem has to be included as well. Whether we put that in the top 10 or make sure that we know that it's right in there. I mean, we're talking, hundreds of thousands of albums that came out in the last 20 years. So, those are two of the best by far. I'm going to talk about another one here, and it's not just because my friend Bradley Cook made this record. Actually, that's totally coincidental. I love this record before knowing that Bradley made this record. Queens of the Stone Age, Rated R. Did that sound like a movie thing? Rated R. I mean, it's a masterpiece. I love the whole desert rock thing. What I loved about desert rock, especially these tones, because they're fat and they're dry and they're dead and they're in your face. I mean, go back and listen to this album. I mean, Songs for the Deaf that came out afterwards, I think was infinitely more successful. But Rated R, the first time I heard it, I was like, this is badass. And I think I'd got an advance copy, because back in those days, you could still get advance copies, you know, print CDs up and wouldn't come out for a couple of months. And it was before like everything was leaked everywhere. And I had a roommate and he was an A&R guy and he bought this record home and put it on. And I was just like, wow. And what I loved about it, I was like, I wonder if this band listens to Hawkwind. And I grew up loving Hawkwind as a kid. This is a masterpiece. It's a great piece of production. Chris Goss, you know, just great work. Bradley was one of the engineers on the record. I mean, just a phenomenal sounding record. I mean, there's some really amazing songs on that record. Highly recommend it. I would put that definitely, and these are in no order, that's in the top 10. And it's just such a phenomenal sounding record. Queens of the Stone Age, what a great band. And especially that lineup, Mark Lanegan as well as Nick Oliveri and Josh Homme together, sorry, probably blowing his name. Just a great lineup, a great band. This one was a big deal and still is for me. Again, we're going all over the place with genre. Outkast, Speakerbox, The Love Below. What a freaking great record. Double album, both of them doing their own thing, writing their own songs. I think Andre's stuff was super pop and had all the big hits, you know. I mean, Hey Ya, what a song. What I loved about Hey Ya is it actually reminded me of all the funk that we love from the 70s. The whole album reminded us funk from the 70s. But it also reminded me of the way that Bowie took funk from the 70s and, you know, did Fame and all of that kind of period in like 73, 74. It felt like they were influenced by the same style of funk. And there's just something on Hey Ya, the first time I came on the radio, it just was like, wow, this is a freaking masterpiece again. I'm using masterpiece a lot, but, you know, we talked about the last 20 years. This is, you know, 2003. I mean, just what a great album. And put it on again. It stands the test of time. And it's because there's a lot of performances on there. I remember Andre was playing bass on a bunch of tracks. And I went back and put on headphones the other day and was just like, wow, this bass playing grooves. I mean, a great singer with great feel and great push and pull can really nail that. I mean, look at George Michael. He was a bass player on some of the best Wham and his solo stuff. It feels like, I don't know, Andre's super talented. And also Big Boy, his album is amazing. Both those albums are absolutely phenomenal. If you haven't heard it, which I'm sure you have, go and check them out. I love the diversity of coming out with top 10 albums of the last 20 years. Thanks for this question. And I believe this album won the Grammy as well that year. Didn't this album win the Grammy for Album of the Year and also Rap Album of the Year? I felt like it just slayed. And there's a reason. It's freaking amazing. This is really difficult because there's about 3 more records. If we got the last spot to take, there's 3 records that I think could take it. I think it would be Bon Iver for Emma, Forever Ago, just for freshness and just being like, wow, what was that? Where did that come from? So either Bon Iver, Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, Wilco, huge album from the last 20 years. But I think the most commercially successful of the 3 I'm about to say has to win it. And that is, and you probably all knew back in your mind, no, this is going to be in the top 10. Green Day's American Idiot. I mean, I'd be a fool not to put that in the top 10. But it's a tough one because those other 2 albums, although not as successful, influenced so many bands, so many musicians started bands, started writing songs because they heard Wilco and they heard Bon Iver. Bon Iver started like or every William Fitzsimmons, like every other singer-songwriter, guys with beards playing acoustic guitars. Guys got together and girls got together and started bands that were more acoustic and more driven by Bon Iver and by Wilco. Those two bands are hugely important. But I would be an idiot, an English idiot, not an American idiot, not to mention that album by Green Day. It is another Cavallo record, so unwittingly, in the top 10 I just named, there's 2 Rob Cavallo productions in there. Absolutely amazing. There's something about American Idiot that has a precision to it, which is absolutely phenomenal. It doesn't ever sound contrived, but it's just concussive. It hits every time. It's an incredible record. So just absolutely amazing record. Well, and I know so many people love it, but okay, thank you ever so much for that amazing question. Why don't we answer one other question that's not the top 10, just so it's not only the top 10. If you had to start all over again, what microphone, preamp, and compressor would you buy? Great question, really super easy. If I only had one of those, the mic that I would buy, it's a sort of 2 answers, isn't it? If there's an unlimited amount of money to spend, then most people would probably buy a mint condition U47. But if we're talking about normal amounts of money, probably the Lewitt LCT 940. I believe that is the most versatile large diaphragm I know for the price. It's their most expensive mic, but I still believe it's about $1,400 or $1,500. It's tube and FET, and it sounds amazing. I'd buy that. And then for a mic pre, a 1073. It's close between a 1073 and a 312. And I personally would buy a BAE 1073. I have several BAE mic pre's, 312s, 1073s, 1028s. I have 10 DCs. And none of them have ever broken down, made a noise, a buzz, a click, or anything. And all of them sound just like the real thing to me, but completely reliable. So that's what I'd probably stick with, is a 1073, the BAE one. And then as far as compressors, if I only could buy one compressor, and that was it, that's all I was allowed to do, I would buy a distressor. I would. The distressor, I think, is the Swiss Army knife of all compressors. It can do every job. I don't actually have one here. I'm not endorsed by them. I'm just telling you, if you're going to buy one compressor only, that's all you had, then buy a distressor. Now, if we're going back to the sort of vintage schmintage world, I would buy what I use, which is a DBX 160, and that's the VU 160 and an 1176. Those two compressors together are the sound I love. But if it's buying brand new now, getting the best value for money, it would be the Lewitt LCT 940, it would be the BAE 1073, and Empirical Labs Distressor. I think those are the three. I think they're the three kings in their particular kingdom. Thank you ever so much this week for the marvelous questions. Even though it was only 2, the first one took a long time. What a wonderful question. And I didn't have any time to prepare, so hopefully I passed my audition. Hopefully I passed the test. I know there's lots of other records. I didn't mention In Rainbows by Radiohead. I could have done that. I didn't mention Amnesiac by them. There's so many other records. God, there's loads. There's, if I stayed on hip hop, I could have put a Kanye record in. There's lots of things I could have done. But I wanted to be really honest and mention the records that when I heard, I was like, wow. And those are the records that I heard that just blew me away. So thank you ever so much for the marvelous questions. Of course, please leave a bunch of comments and questions below. Don't forget to hit the like button. That's always quite wonderful. And of course, you can go to producelikeapro.com and sign up for the email list. Have a marvelous time recording and mixing.